Well, welcome everyone to our third webinar of the Enrollment Growth University webinar series, Driving Institutional Success with Technology and Data Intelligence. This is one of the topics that we touch on in our Enrollment Growth Playbook, and it's something that I know is particularly salient within higher ed today. There's many conversations about the topics that we're going to be covering today in this webinar. If you do not have a copy of the Enrollment Growth Playbook yet, it is available for free on our website, helixeducation.com. So I encourage you to head over there and download your free copy whenever it's convenient for you. So again, this is something that we wanted to really touch on and really wrestle with the content that we put together around these topics. And also, don't let the conversation end here. If you want to engage with this content throughout the webinar and after the fact, you can do so on social media using hashtag HelixWebinar. And we're really excited to present this to you today. And it is my great pleasure to finally introduce our presenter, Matt McKillen. Matt is the VP of Product Management here at Helix, and he is a seasoned EdTech veteran with years of experience in the space, and he's going to be really speaking about all aspects of technology and data intelligence that we'll want to talk to you. So with that, Matt, I will hand the presentation over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Danielle. And well done keeping everybody interested and engaged in those 15 minutes leading up. And quick shout out to my Ohio person joining. Lived in Ohio for many, many years. So lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I don't know where you're calling from, but Ohio's definitely got a special place in my heart still. So all right, well with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and just do a little bit more of an introduction on myself. So I, as Danielle mentioned, my name is Matt McKillen. I'm VP of Product here at Helix. I have lots of different types of experience here in higher education, from implementation to data integration, and now I've more recently taken up the role as VP of Product after years of product experience elsewhere in the industry. So I'm really excited to be taking up this role and really be leading the charge that Helix is driving in terms of really making data-driven decisions within higher education. So really what we want to do today is, as Danielle mentioned, take a look and dive a little bit deeper into the data that we have on campus, how we can connect that data, and then once that data is connected, how do we actually apply that data. But really, before we get started, I thought it would be a good idea to really level set where we are right now. And again, this is more of a level set for kind of higher ed in general, right? We can't necessarily pin down every university, but I kind of want to look at where higher ed is in general from a kind of data use perspective. So Helix conducted a survey last year in 2016 that kind of really looked to dive into that and exactly see, you know, what do higher ed institutions use their data for? How are they using it? And how are they using it to drive decisions on campus? So what I want to do is just take a look at some of those results, some of those findings, and then really dive into what that means for data use in the state of higher ed. So I think if we were to be honest, and if we were to look at the data usage on our campus and how our data story is helping us, I think we would probably say it could look a little something like this. We have marketing data all the way over on the left that's kind of doing its thing. It's trying to fill the top of the funnel. We've got different marketing channels and different ways to bring leads in. And then towards the middle, we have our admissions CRM data, where we're building profiles on the students and driving them through to the application. And then off to the right, we have either our student information system or our LMS that's kind of tracking current student progress. But as we see here, and as some of our data is shown, which we'll take a look at here in a minute, it's just not tied together very well, right? The data story on most university campuses is very convoluted and not very streamlined. Now, how do we know that? So in our survey that we ran last year, we found 68% of respondents came back to us with an unknown inquiry to start conversion rate. Now, this is a pretty critical data point, as I'm sure you all could be imagining. So if we think about our funnel, right, everybody knows the admissions funnel. We throw a lot of students in at the top as raw leads, raw inquiries, and eventually we have a much smaller number come through as enrolled students. But what does this actual unknown inquiry to start conversion rate look like? I'm going to go out on a ledge after working with institutions for many years now and assume that you all do most of your planning based on how many students you actually need enrolled, whether that be for a specific course, perhaps a program or an intake, or however you run your enrollment process. I'm assuming that most of that is planned by enrolls, right? It's how you drive resources needed on campus. It's how you drive financial modeling moving forward. And so what this means, if we have 68% of institutions that are not aware of their inquiry to conversion start rate, it means that if you know that you need 100 students, it means that there is very little insight into how many students need to fill the top of the funnel. And so really what it means is that we might have our enrollment goals, but we're running blind in terms of how we get there. And so this data point, to me, when I saw this, was very concerning because it means that we might know where we need to go with this 100 enrolled students, but we aren't sure exactly what needs to take place and how much of that needs to take place in order to drill down to the 100 enrolled students. So let's take a look at what I would call another alarming fact. Right, we have 83% of undergraduate institutions and 56% of graduate institutions do not know their cost per inquiry for their most effective marketing channel. So if we go back to our model that we looked at on the previous slide, right, we have our 100 enrolled students, and let's say maybe we do or we have figured out that we need 200 raw inquiries, but again, I don't think we can necessarily make that assumption easily because as we saw in the last slide, not many universities do. But here, what that means, if we know that we need 100 enrolled students, first we saw that we weren't quite sure how many raw inquiries that means. And second, we have no idea how much that's going to cost us to actually fill the top of the funnel and end up with 100 enrolled students. So we can see another very alarming fact for planning, for financial modeling, for casting a financial model a few years out or even a few semesters out. It will be very, very difficult to plan for those 100 students that are needed if we don't know these two statistics. So let's take a look at one more. 47% of institutions have an unknown cost per enrollment. So what does this actually mean? If we take a look at the bottom of the funnel and we are not sure how much it costs to bring a student into the bottom of the funnel, we don't have an ROI for our return on our previous investment. And again, very, very concerning from a planning perspective. It means a lot of what we can assume and what many of us maybe have seen from personal experience, universities might not be as thorough or as detailed in their planning as maybe we would like to be. But it also means future institutional planning. We might not know how many students to project, and we don't know exactly what portion of their revenue that they're bringing into the institution actually hits the bottom line. So lots of potentially concerning statistics that we've seen here, and I guarantee you we will not stay this grim for the remaining part of the webinar. All right, we're going to hopefully look how to fix these data inconsistencies, how to use data to fix some of these problems. And so what I'd like to suggest is that what if our data story looked something like this? It looked more linear as opposed to having lots of different systems across campus collecting lots of different data. What if we could tell a story where we had our marketing data travel with the student into their perspective, into your admissions CRM, so you could track your cost per inquiry? And then what if all of that data, your marketing data, your admissions data, went into your current student system, so you could really track through from a prospective student to a graduate student, which email campaigns were most effective or which events were most effective in the ROI of those specific events. And so I think that there is a lot of potential to really tell a very convincing story with a more linear approach to how data flows, not just through the admissions funnel, but through the entire student life cycle. So let's take a look at what this could mean. If we could build this, potentially utopian data world where everything is very, very well connected, we could prove and have proven success in recruitment tactics. Meaning we could take a look at some of our graduates, and we could take a look at our top 10% of our kind of best performing graduates, or graduates that are maybe most engaged. And we could see, what do we do with those students during their recruitment process that was most successful, right? What channels do they come into the system on? what email campaigns while they were an applicant, really drove them to be motivated to finish their application and really motivated them to continue their studies throughout to graduation. So lots of really great things we can look at with graduation data and admissions CRM data. What about course success metrics? Something I have not seen a lot of universities tie together in their data story. And so what if we could take a look at graduates, and we could take a look at our most successful graduates, and we could see what courses they excelled in. Or perhaps we could take a look at courses that did not have a very high impact to our graduates. And as institutions, we always want to be providing top tier coursework, and we want to ensure that the courses and that the curriculum that we're sending our students through is as effective as possible. And if we can take a look at specific graduate data that shows us areas where we might have gaps in our coursework, that could be a really strong area to improve our overall output of the education that we're giving these students. We could even look at which assignments might result in dropout rates. So if your LMS is feeding in assignments into a retention system, we could take a look at a week after this assignment was given, we saw a spike in dropouts, and then we know, well, hey, we should work with that professor on tweaking some of these assignments and making them a little more, a little easier, or at least a little more direction for our students. We could also take a look at success of our enrollment coaches, right? So if we have this data story that's going all the way through, so again, not just stopping at an enrollment funnel, but going all the way through to graduation, we could take a look at how our enrollment coaches are doing, or our success coaches working with retention. And if we find that one specific enrollment coach or a success coach for retention has a very, very high success rate in the students that they work with, we could use that as a model for training the rest of our admissions team or the rest of our retention team. And again, we can do that by looking at graduate data or even current student data to see who's being most successful, and how that data kind of carries through will allow us to loop back to our enrollment and success coaches for better training. And finally, we can take a look at how much to spend on top alumni contributors, right? We know that contributions don't have to be monetary, right? This could be with their time, and we know, what very early in the funnel produce these really successful and engaged alumni, and how do we continue to cultivate those engaged and successful alumni from day one of recruitment. So there's lots of exciting things that we can do with a data story that drives all the way through the student life cycle. And this might, some of these things and some of these ways that we are using data, that we're encouraging institutions to use data, could seem a little far out, right? They could seem, like it's not quite feasible or quite attainable. But really what we're hoping to do today is focus in on 3 areas and give you all some practical things to take home to your institutions and your campuses, where we can really say, hey, if you can run these 3 things, and if you can take away some hopefully insights from this presentation and from our webinar today and take them back to campus, you can get a few steps closer to that data model that we just looked at. And so the way we're going to break this down is we're going to break this down in 3 different areas: identify, connect, and apply. And identify is really going to focus in on what systems we should target on campus, and we've kind of given you a preview of them in the last few slides, but also what are some key data points that live in those systems that we should look at targeting for future use. Then we'll look at connect. Right now that we've identified our systems, identified the key data points within that system, how do we connect those data points across systems, right, across campus to really drive valuable data insights? And then the third step is apply, right? We now have these new valuable data insights. How do we actually apply them on campus? And so that's really what we want to do, and we're going to be doing that across the life cycle, right? From enrolled from inquiry to enrolled all the way through to graduation, like we mentioned. We really want to make sure that this is a consistent data story across the entire student life cycle. So let's talk about identifying our data sources. So I've set this up a little bit in the previous slides, so let's just go ahead and jump straight in. You all will get very used to these icons throughout my deck. I'm going to use these to kind of represent the different parts of the data story that we're trying to connect here. And so we're first going to look at our marketing campaigns. So first, I want to make sure we identify what we mean when we say marketing campaign. Marketing campaigns, and how we're going to be talking about them today, is going to be really, how do we fill the top of our funnel, right? It's aggressively making sure we are filling the top of our enrollment funnel. And so that could look very different to different institutions, but it could be Google AdWords that you're paying for. It could still continue to be direct mail campaigns, banner ads, print and digital media. We could even lump purchase lists into this group, right? These are things that you are spending money on and that you are doing to very, very aggressively get the top of the funnel as full as possible. So that's when we're thinking about marketing and what we're doing for this webinar series. That's kind of the way we want to think about it. And one of the most critical data points as we are kind of aggregating some of our marketing data, and we will see this, you've already seen this in some of our first slides, and you'll see this in slides towards the end of this webinar, is total marketing spend is going to be a critical data point. But not necessarily even just total marketing spend. It could be spend by specific channel, or it could be how much are we spending on this specific Google AdWord, or how much are we spending on a direct mail campaign for our online MBA program, right? So we want to track the total spend of our marketing dollars, and hopefully we'll see as we start to connect this through the rest of this data story, we'll see where that can start to draw out some valuable data insights. So Enrollment CRM is the next system that we want to talk about. I would imagine that many of you, if you are doing any type of enrollment work, you are probably using some type of Enrollment CRM to help with that work. So what does that mean? What does an Enrollment CRM mean, right? It's how we strategically route inquiries. It's how we automate communication plans. But this is also our first point in contact in really building great data around our students. Right, so when we're in the marketing phase, we're just looking to dump leads into the top of the funnel. But then once they're in this inquiry phase of our funnel, this is when our admissions and recruitment teams can really start working these leads and cultivating these leads and building as robust of a data profile on our students as possible. And so what we typically like to encourage is early on in the funnel, focus on kind of light data, right? Bio demo data, maybe family history data, very, very light data to just help build a general profile of the student. And then as they start to move through the funnel and as they start to show signs of being more and more engaged through the recruitment and admissions process, we can start to drill in to more interest-related questions, such as their program of interest or academic area of interest when they're looking to attend campus, right? What term or intake are they interested in? We could even start to ask non-academic related questions. Just in general, what are your interests? What motivates you, right? We can start to build this profile. Again, hopefully that we can start to already see can carry through to a retention process and a helpful information to have on our graduates. So retention CRM. So really a retention CRM, and I'll give you a sneak peek into the last one, is our LMS or SIS. The data points that we capture here we can find are probably going to be the same. And the reason I say that is if you have a retention CRM, you are probably integrating that to some extent with your LMS. If you're not, I would highly recommend that. As we'll see, the kind of insights that can drive are pretty robust. So a retention CRM is really all about automating and personalizing success coaching, and ideally doing that in a very proactive way. So we at Helix would very highly recommend, if you are running a retention CRM, integrate that retention CRM with your LMS, because that is going to provide you invaluable data that helps with this coaching process. Things like, our coursework and grades and GPAs and attendance markers, and just general engagement with different faculty or staff or folks around campus, that all can then translate into risk markers within Retain or a retention CRM. And if you can have these risk markers and start to build some of this profile data to hopefully identify who these students are and what might make them at risk, we can reach out to them proactively to pull them in. So those are some of the key data fields. You can see I've got a stat down here. It was a stat that was pulled, I believe it was from NCES, that is about 40% of students will drop out if not coached in some way. So that's a pretty alarming statistic as well. You do all this hard work to pull these students into the system. You spend a lot of money to get them into the top of the funnel, but if you're not cultivating those students and helping them and coaching them throughout their experience, you're going to see a drop in their admissions rates. Okay, and like I said, LMS, I think we can go through this relatively quickly. It's going to be very similar data, right? This is how we can incorporate academic data into automating these coaching processes. So if you're not running a retention CRM, you're probably not integrating an LMS into that CRM. So I would recommend integrating this with your data story. However your data story on campus ends up playing out, we would highly, highly recommend that an LMS or even your student information system is going to have very, very valuable data for your data story. Okay, so I do want to pause. We've taken a look at 4 systems that are critical to tying together your data story. And we've taken a look at some data points that you should be able to gather just individually from those systems, right? Your marketing should have your overall marketing spend, even if that's broken down by channel or by vendor. We should start to build a robust and a rich profile and data around our students in our CRM system. And then we can have GPA data and attendance data from our retention CRM and or from our LMS, and then overall engagement levels from our LMS are going to be critical fields to pull. Again, those are fields that live pretty independently in those systems. And here in the next few slides, we're going to take a look at, well, how do we grab some of these data points from one system, tie it to a data system from another, and produce an even more valuable data point. So that's going to be connecting our data. So I always like to try to interject a little bit of humor, if for no other reason because I enjoy it, into some of my decks here. So hopefully you guys have not been in a scenario like this. I think unfortunately I have been, where you think you're receiving this great set of connected data, and all of a sudden for one reason or another you realize it's not there, or it's not coming over, or it's not correct. And that's because connecting data can be hard, right? It's not easy. I'm not by any means pretending that this is an easy thing to do, but what I am suggesting is that it is worth the effort to make sure that you have consistent data across your entire student journey and not segmented across campus. So, this section of connecting the data is not intended to be technical, right? We're not going to be talking about, web services and web hooks and CSV files flying around campus. Really what I want to more focus on is finding those data points and which data points are critical to connect from one system to another. But I am going to make a recommendation on maybe how you can integrate your platforms. And this is the only slide that will kind of talk about what the architecture could look like on campus, right? Because that's probably a little too technical even for me to start getting into. So we recommend one platform that all of your systems can plug into. And right now, I would imagine that if you're working on an enrollment CRM, there's probably an integration to your student record system, right? So there are integrations happening on campus, but if you really want to tie in to the power of a connected data story on campus, we really, really recommend that you have a system on campus that is dedicated to being your data platform, right? It's how you're going to be able to pull everything together, and then that platform is where you're going to be making these connections that we'll take a look at here in a minute. And we have found, again, through the study that we did back in 2016, again, this is another kind of scary stat to look at for the state of data in higher ed. So only 38% of institutions have integrated their marketing, enrollment, and retention solutions. So again, if we want to be able to capture all these fantastic data insights, and if we want to make data-driven decisions in our admissions process, we have to tie these platforms together. So I'll get off my soapbox. That's how we would recommend doing it. We've seen great success from our customers that we work with in terms of the data that we're able to pull, and we are here to advocate for other higher ed institutions to do the same on your campus. So I'd like to just walk through some examples of things that we can do once we have our data kind of all in one spot. So we've identified data points that are critical from all different systems. Now let's tie them together to even have a more robust data set. So we've talked about this one. I would imagine many of you are already probably aware of what this is going to be, right? If we can take our total marketing spend from our marketing platform, and if we can tie that into our enrollment funnel from raw inquiry all the way through to starts or enrollments, we're going to be able to identify our cost per start and our cost per inquiry, and subsequently our ROI on our investment. Again, I think we touched on a little bit earlier why this is such a critical data point, and we will continue to kind of hammer this as we finish up the webinar today. But pulling these data points together, it might seem like a small data point, but it is going to be invaluable in the number of things that it lets you do on campus from a planning perspective, from a financial modeling perspective. And so knowing these two bits of data along with your admissions CRM is going to really, really give you all some robust data, and we'll dig into maybe how to use that data in our apply section of the webinar. So let's take a look at another one, student profile data along with student success metrics. So we talked about building this robust profile of data from your CRM, and if we can find the students that are successful, right? So we have this robust data profile, we have a profile on our students that are active. If we can find our active student population and we can say, let's see what those successful students look like, and let's see what really makes them successful, we can really work to find best fit students for our institutional programs. Now, this is critical because you're going to have students coming to you that, you know, maybe aren't sure the route that they want to take in their studies, or maybe you see that they have shown interest in a specific, you know, nursing program at your campus or an MBA program at your campus. But you know through this connected data insights that their specific kind of demographic of students or profile of students tends to excel in another program. You have a great opportunity to really service your students during the admissions process and at least make a recommendation. Hey, we've seen we've seen students similar to you really excel in this specific course, in this program. And so you can really find that best fit for your students. And again, it all goes back to really servicing the student and making sure they are having the best educational experience possible at your institution. So I'm double dipping here. We're looking at marketing data and admissions CRM data, and we're coupling that with successful graduation dates. Now, this is a big one for me. I think that this is really, really fundamental in how you all can change and streamline and drive efficiencies, save money across your admissions and recruitment strategy. So let's paint a little bit of a picture here. We have our raw inquiries, and we can say that could come from our marketing team. We could even take a look at the, one step down in our funnel in our admissions CRM, and that's eventually going to drive all the way through to total graduates, right? So this is where we say we're not just stopping at enrolled students, right? We're going all the way through the student life cycle to graduates. And what does that mean? What can we do with this data? Imagine if we could take a look at our graduates, and we could say, what events did they attend? What are their giving patterns? Again, monetary or time-related giving patterns. We know that's equally as valuable. Success patterns for these specific graduates. And what if we can tie that back to our inquiry pool and take a look at that from a recruitment perspective? And we could say, hey, this event that we went to yielded an incredibly high amount of graduate and successful students. Or you could even strip it down more than that. We have noticed that engaging with our inquiries early on at the top of the funnel in person has actually produced a much higher graduation rate than those students who we just emailed or than those students who just came in organically through our website. So honestly, I mean, this is such a key data point for universities to really wrap their heads around because it can significantly influence the very, very top part of the funnel and really how you all operate on a day-to-day basis. There's so many insights you can learn about your operating procedures, email campaigns that run, even in your admissions CRM, those email campaigns, if we can tie that back to graduate engagement or even current student engagement, maybe we don't need to be managing that 15, 20 email, long communication plan anymore because it's not really doing a lot for our students or for our graduates. So a lot of really, really great insights that can be drawn from pulling your inquiry data all the way through to graduation. All right, our final item here, graduate data plus current student data. This to me is another really interesting one and something we don't see a lot of institutions doing. What if we could take a look at a class of recent graduates and we could look at where they are now. We could look at their placements, their job types, their titles, their average salaries, and we could draw a comparison back to where they had success or maybe where they didn't have success in specific courses while they were enrolled at your institution. And what if we could use those insights from our recently graduated students and draw a correlation to success or failure of specific courses? And what if we saw that we had a lot of really successful students that maybe weren't performing well in a specific course? That could tell us that potentially that course maybe not, it's not necessarily correlated to the success of those students afterwards, and we might be able to either tweak that course offering or change that course offering altogether. Or subsequently, we could take a look at recent graduates that maybe are not, in the placements that they would want, or the salary range or job titles that they would want, all those things that are important to recent graduates. And we could look and we could say, well, why is that? What courses did they struggle in? Or what courses maybe were missing from their specific educational experience that we need to look at really ramping up and really modifying and really strengthening. So I think if we really go back to this slide again, kind of our recap slide. So we started at the very top level of saying what systems are important and what data fields inside of those systems should we really think about pulling out. And then in this last section we said, well, now that we've pulled these data fields out and we've connected our data story across campus, how do we combine that data to find even more valuable insights? So we looked early on in the marketing space on return on investment, right, and how return on investment will both help from a planning perspective and just a general operational perspective. And then we looked over in the CRM world of kind of best fit mentality, right? How do we kind of combine graduate data with admissions data to ensure we are doing our students justice during the admissions process and really pointing them in the right direction in terms of best fit. We've talked about optimizing recruitment using graduate data, right, in terms of how do we ensure that we are using graduate data to influence what we should be doing inside of our admissions and recruitment office. And then we've seen fine-tuning programs using graduate data on the LMS side of the world. So again, we've taken this separate data, right, this data that has lived in separate systems. We've combined it to really find these new and different insights that we have across campus. And now what I would like to do, and what I think, again, is kind of where this all comes together, is really how do we apply this data, right? What does this specific data set look like in terms of how do we functionally execute on this new data on campus? And I think this is really where we see some of our more exciting kind of takeaways from hopefully this webinar series. But I think before we do that, I do want to pause for questions. I don't know if there have been questions coming in. Danielle is going to be monitoring the chat for me. But before we get too deep into kind of the apply section of the webinar, I do want to kind of just step back, make sure there aren't any questions that we can level set on before we look into the apply section. And then we will, of course, have time after the last section here for another round of Q&A. So I'd like to pause, Danielle, maybe see if there are any questions that came over via chat that we can get answered.
Yeah, so I see a couple here, Matt. One of them that I think is an important question to answer is how can you be sure that the findings that you're getting when you are mining your data really signify trends and that they're not disparate or random data points? And I think essentially, what that's asking is how do you avoid maybe reading too much into things, and how do you make sure that you have a robust enough data set to make decisions upon?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, and I would answer that in two different directions. I would say the first thing that is really important that you do, and something that we work really hard on here at Helix, is to make sure that your operational process is very consistent across the board. So if you're having your enrollment team or whoever is managing these leads as they come through, make sure that the data that they are entering they're entering that data in the same way at the same time for the same reason across all the leads that are coming into the system, and not necessarily just kind of on a one-off. So it's really, really important that there is a process around data entry, because you're right, that data will be mined eventually. And if that data was entered in a very inconsistent format, it's not going to be very valuable in the long run. I think the second part of that question is a really good one as well, which is kind of how do we know that it's not just kind of a random data spike or a data trend in one direction. And to that I would say building this data story on your campus is a marathon and not a race. And I say that kind of twofold. One, it's going to take a little bit of time to pull this together, to put your data processes in place. But two, once that happens, you will be able to start collecting year-on-year data or term-on-term data even. And so once you start to build this process, right, that's kind of foundational. You've built this connected data story. You have to make sure your data is entered consistently. And then you can build kind of year on year, term on term, however often you start your students, you can start looking at that cycle, year over year, term over term, to really see if there are any outliers, right? Maybe one term we had a terribly high melt rate, which we'll look at here in a few minutes, between submitted applicant and a complete applicant. And you might not be aware right away. If this is the first time you're collecting your data, the reality is you might not be aware right away if that is high or low, but it could be alarming, which is a good thing, right? It sets off flags. But then over the coming terms or semesters, you'll start to see, hey, this actually is pretty normal for us. We need to plug that hole, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Or you could see, hey, these last 3 semesters that we ran, the melt was much, much lower than the first one. And so, you can start to see your data trends at your university level, but it's going to take time, right? It's going to take time, especially if this is not something that you have done in the past and that these are not pieces of data that you've collected in the past. It will take a little bit of time to benchmark those specific data requirements to see if they're data spikes or if they're outliers or if they're not. Now, one thing I would recommend, there are kind of industry benchmarks that you could probably get out there and find. And if we don't have to get into that today, but if there are questions on what some of those benchmarks will be, my contact details will be up on the last part of the slide. I'd be happy to kind of chat with you all about those. But if this data story is new to you and you haven't started collecting all of this great data, maybe the best place to start, instead of waiting on term over term or year over year data, is basically saying, hey, look, how do I get some just general benchmark data for an institution that looks similar to me? And that's definitely something that is out there that will kind of help you in your first few terms or years using a new data structure.
Great, and I've got one more question here. The question is, how do we enroll students who don't know which field of graduation they want or they fit into?
I think that's a great question. And I think it spans 2 different parts of the student life cycle. I think it spans the admissions process and the retention process. So I think that there is definitely an avenue during the admissions process to target your communications around students where they might be successful, right? So they might not be asking your advice, right? They might not come to you during the admissions process and say, I need help figuring out which program. If they do, that's fantastic. Jump on that. Get that student hooked and engaged. If they're not, I would encourage that that's an opportunity where we can use our data to drive either an email campaign, a text message campaign, a phone call campaign, and you're going to know the program of interest that the student is coming to you with. And you can absolutely, I've actually seen some of these email campaigns run in the past where you can make sure they're aware of different MBA offerings or different business offerings, or you could even throw something in there that says, hey, students that came in and that look like you and your similar kind of background often studied this program and were very successful. Click here for more information. So students don't always have to come to you and ask you necessarily, hey, which program do you recommend? But again, if we have this data in our kind of current student or graduate student database that we know, hey, this type of student was very successful, very happy with their coursework, very happy with their program, they're doing great things now as an alumni, why wouldn't you say to an inbound student, hey, check this out. Check out this student that studied this program and they were really happy. Give that a thought. Think through different programs as you're coming to as you're enrolling in university. But then I mentioned that's twofold. Follow that up in retention, right? Follow that up. If a student, maybe, who knows if they'll end up taking that advice, if they even want that advice. But again, I think as an institution, it's a great idea for you to kind of broaden their view. And then follow that up in retention. Proactively reach out to those students that were part of that communication plan, right? So here's where you can connect your CRM communication plan with a retention model and say, hey, if in your admissions process we were encouraging you to apply for different programs, let's move that data over into retain or a retention solution and say, hey, let's build a proactive retention plan that says, hey, how are you liking your program? We know that, students in the past have also done well in this program, so we want to make sure that you're enjoying your program, coursework is going well, that there aren't any major questions in what you're doing now. right? So I think there's lots of different ways that we can do that. But again, what I see is a great opportunity for universities to really guide their students to find kind of this, really it's the student's best fit educational option for them. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Great, and I've got one more question, and then for the sake of time, we can save any question that comes in after this until the end. But this question is, how do you account for human factors, such as different use of the LMS by students, professors, and managers? How can you address the fast technology advances with some groups that run slower? How do you use flow process for the data collection system?
Okay. All right, that's a big question. So I think what I kind of heard, I think maybe I heard two things. You know, how do you control people using the system differently, which is very hard to do, right? Even if you put a process in place, it's very hard to do. And then how do you manage onboarding of maybe new technology or use of technology? So it's a very hard one, and I don't know if I have a cut and dry answer for that. I think what I can tell you is the best way that I've found to increase user adoption is to show output from what you're asking the users to do. So if we are building this really great data story throughout the entire student journey, the best and the quickest way that we can do that is to turn around and show those folks in the LMS or in the student record system or even in the retention or admission CRM, hey, look, what you're doing and the data you're entering is having a real-world impact on students and a real-world impact on our process. I think another thing to do is we as much as possible, we want to streamline the use of our data. And this is something I probably should have covered earlier. When we're pulling all these systems together, you want to integrate smart, not necessarily just integrate fast, right? So think about the key data points that you are asking these people to input. Don't ask them to input 50 fields, right? Think about what you want your results to be, what data is going to drive those results, and those are the things we should be focusing on having our users enter. So I think the reason that's a hard one to answer is there's no silver bullet, right? There's no way to get people to adopt technology. There's no way to get perfectly everyone in line with how it's used, but you can absolutely take steps to ensure that the onboarding and the consistent use of the technology is as buttoned up as possible.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Sure thing. Okay. So let's, like I mentioned, we will have one more round of Q&A at the end, so keep those questions coming. So let's focus in now on applying your data. So really organically in our conversation today, we've already looked at a handful of reasons or a handful of ways that we can apply this newfound connected data that we've identified on campus. So I think that's been fantastic. So let's go through and let's take a look at a few more. And I'm going to show you one more comic strip that I found humorous. And I think this is actually a good question because this ties back to one of the questions, right? How do you know that the data you're mining should actually be used strategically, right? It's not just enough to mine your data. You have to know and have some confidence that your data can be used strategically and then put a plan around it. So I kind of found this funny. It's not enough just to mine your data and look at your data and admire your data. Hey, we integrated all these systems. That's great. You have to do something with it, right? You have to have a strategy around the data, and you have to make sure that that strategy is actionable and it's going to drive results. So let's take a look at a few more kind of real-world examples as to what this could look like. So I've mentioned this a few times. I think I get on two different soapboxes when I talk about these things. You've already seen me on one. It was the inquiry to graduation data and all of the things that your graduates can tell you about how you should be doing your recruitment and your retention, or your recruitment and enrollment. This is another one. Accurate and reliable enrollment planning. Some of those statistics that we saw early on, to me, were very, very scary. And I think I mentioned this. It gives us the impression that, again, the higher ed sector in general, obviously there's going to be outliers here and there, but the higher ed sector in general is running blind when it comes to planning for their starts or planning for their terms or planning for their different academic periods. They kind of have an idea of where they're going, and they're just kind of running, trying to stick prospects on the wall and hope they come through to enrollment. So what could tying all of this data that we looked at, this connected data set, how could we actually use that to plan? Now, we've already taken a look at some of these. So I think we all agree that, hey, hopefully by now we agree it's a good idea that we can connect our marketing data and our admissions data into this nice platform to give us all these cool stats and cool things that we can play with. So let's say, right, we know we have 100 students that we need to enroll. I think it's a relatively safe assumption to say we plan from enrolls, right? We need 100 students. That's what drives financial modeling. That's what drives, bottom line revenue growth for the institution. It's an important thing to be able to know. And we now can know our raw inquiries, right? We've kind of talked through a few of these early ones already. But what's important now is we finally have an answer to how much we are going to need to put forward to fill the top of the funnel. So if someone at your university comes to you, president, vice president comes to you and says, hey, we need 100 students in our online MBA program this fall. Have to have it. We need to see growth in the MBA program. That's your growth metric for you, admissions office. Well, you can finally go back to this president or provost and say, hey, that's fine. Based on what we have in the past, we're going to need about 2,000 raw inquiries, and we know from historical data that that's going to take us about $250,000 to actually pull the trigger on. And maybe your president says, great, here's the money. Maybe your president says, prove it. And hey, if he says prove it, you get into this reporting tool down here and you say, hey, look, here's what we've seen in the past. Here's how we've seen, these records move through from our marketing team into our admissions team. And if you want 100 students, it's going to take $250,000 to really fill the top of that funnel to the point where we can enroll 100 students in this online MBA program. So very, very powerful stuff. I get really excited, maybe too excited when we start talking about this planning element of pulling things all the way through. Let's kind of continue that, right? We have 2,000 raw inquiries. I think we've agreed on that. 100 enrolled students. I think we're all happy there. But what can we do from a forecasting perspective? And how can we throw out and almost project what is going to happen as we are working towards this start, right? So the example might be, hey, we start today, right? We start today on April 18th to recruit and plan for let's just say a late June program or intake or term that is starting. So we are starting today and we're saying, okay, great. We know when we start, right? We've built our plan. We know if we need 100 enrolled students, we need 2,000 raw inquiries and $250,000. But now it's 4 weeks in or 2 weeks in, right? How are we tracking against our plan? Well, 4 weeks in, we might only have 100 raw inquiries, and we can forecast that down to say, actually, that's only gonna result in about 50 enrolled students. That's trouble, right? So we've kind of got a forecast that says, hey, we're off our mark, just like a financial forecast. I'm sure many universities or companies that you work at do your Q1, 2, 3, and 4 planning, right? And if you're off in Q1, you're going to readjust your forecast for Q2. With a connected data set through marketing and admissions, you can have this specific forecast. And so what could you do? You're 3 weeks into your specific recruitment window for this program that starts in June, and you might go and look in your CRM data and say, hey, here is an email campaign that's performed really well. I'm going to spin that up for another group of students. Or you could jump all the way back to your marketing channels and say, hey, these Google AdWords, of these 50 enrolled students we have, 3 weeks in, 35 of them came in through this specific Google AdWord campaign. So maybe I'll lower my spending in another marketing channel, and I'll bolster up my spending in this specific Google AdWord campaign. So this forecast allows you to have really, really deep insights into what's coming a few months out, and then it allows you to loop back to your marketing spend or your CRM admissions kind of workflow and communication campaigns. So very, very valuable data when we start thinking about planning. Okay, trends in attrition. So we talked a little bit about melt. So we already kind of jumped into this. Melt happens, right? It's going to happen. It's why we call it a funnel. You're putting more students in than you're ever going to have at the bottom. How can we use a connected data set to identify trends in attrition and hopefully plug some of these holes? The first thing I will tell you is do not settle with your current melt numbers. I've worked with universities in the past, and they have just assumed that their melt rates are their melt rates and that that's okay. I would very strongly encourage you all not to settle for your melt rates. Melt means that you are spending money at the top of the funnel and it's not working its way into the bottom of the funnel. And that's not necessarily ideal. It means that you are not spending your money efficiently and effectively. So what are some things that we can do with our connected data set to help us with MELT? First of all, we can look at historical trends. So this was the one that I've already kind of touched on, right? This year we have an unusually high rate in our applicants to applications, or our completed applicants to enrolled students. Why is that? Should that be alarming, or maybe historically is that kind of where we've performed? Now, one way or another, whether you performed there in the past or this is new, right? We can pretty easily dive in to marketing channels to see how our marketing channels are performing. Kind of talked about this on the last slide, again, highlighting the importance of getting that marketing data in from the very, very beginning. Could we cut the spend, right? If a bunch of students from a specific purchase list are melting out of our funnel at an alarming rate, maybe we go through and we say, listen, we're not going to spend any more money with this lead vendor, or we're going to stop spending money on our Google AdWords campaign because all these students that are coming in are just melting out. But hey, look, our students that are coming in through our website inquiry form, just maybe organically, seem to be very interested, and they're persisting through to the rest of the funnel. So maybe we build some sort of campaign to promote our inquiry form on our website and drive students to our inquiry form. So lots of ways that we can kind of dive into our marketing channels to assess what's happening with MELT. And then, like I said, use the data, right? We got to use the data that we find to hopefully plug some gaps later on. Graduate trends are another one, right? Students that are maybe in this melting demographics, right? How, maybe we see that students from a specific region are melting out faster than another. Let's go and find students from that region that have been successful at this institution, have thrived at this institution, and are contributing graduates. And let's go figure out what made them so successful, what they loved about the institution and their studies, and build a marketing email campaign towards these students that are now melting, highlighting all of those things that are now graduates or now current students really loved about their studies or their time at your specific institution. So I think we can, even when we're looking at MELT at the very, very first part of the funnel, we can still tie in and find effective ways to use this current student or graduate student data to impact what's happening at the very, very top of the funnel. Okay, proactive outreach on retention is another big one. So again, we talked about, and we looked at that stat that 40% of students will drop out if you are not in some way reaching out to those students to ensure that they are, you could even just say that they're happy, with their coursework and that they're doing well and they're not stressed and overwhelmed. So we've highlighted some of this. We can take it a step further, right? We know, and we can look at our student demographics that are coming into our SIS or our LMS. We can pull that data, and we should be pulling that data in from our marketing channels and our admissions CRM tool. And I would argue that probably 75 to 80% of the data that you need to assess risk on a student, if you want to build a risk marker for this proactive approach, I would argue that 75 to 80% of it is already captured in your marketing data, your admissions CRM, or maybe even already through your student record system. So take advantage of the data that you already have to populate risk indicators or risk flags, right? We know if attendance drops below a certain percentage, we should throw a risk flag and a retention solution. Low grades from the LMS is another one. And we should really be building proactive communication plans in our retention CRM system that is going to allow our success or retention coaches to just almost identify and connect with the student before they've even thought about dropping out, right? Maybe we see attendance plus grades dipping for a semester. Let's get on the phone with them, and before they even have the thought of this is too overwhelming, let's get those grades up, let's give them some encouragement, and let's make sure that they have the support that they need to work through. And let's really, I think as an institution and as a higher ed sector, we have almost an obligation to fix that 40% number, right? It is students' educational value and really a complete kind of change of life potentially for some students in this education, what we have to do to impact those students through what we're doing here. And I think we have almost an unwritten obligation to get in here with the retention CRM, use data that we've already collected on these students, and keep these students engaged in moving through their student journey. All right, so let's wrap up this slide again, or this section. So I'll maybe recap what we did and how we started. We started by looking at systems and data in those systems. We drilled down into how do we now connect these data points in these different systems together to drive value, and then we've looked at how do we use those new data points that are driving value in real world examples. So we looked early on driving financial planning with some of the spend numbers in the marketing campaigns, forecasting your enrollment goals during the enrollment process, driving proactive retention for current students, and then risk indicators, again, with this LMS data that's coming through. So hopefully that's a really good kind of, I guess you could call it a path forward. If you're struggling with data on campus, right, we want to identify the systems and the data that's within those systems. We have to tie those together, and we looked at some really practical data elements that we could tie together. Then we looked at real-world applications. So, that's really kind of a recap, and you could even call it a charge or a next steps or what to be taking back to campus in terms of finding your systems and your critical data, right? And that also ties back to one of the questions that we were talking about earlier. The data that's critical for you will be different than the data that's critical for another institution. And so one of the things that I really encourage universities to do as I've worked with them over the years is before you jump into a data integration story, and before you start integrating this data, it is so worth the time to think through, almost reverse engineer what you want to get out of this data story that you're tying together. And if your most critical action item or takeaway from your data story is enrollment planning, then those data fields should be the ones that you focus on when you're thinking about an integration story, and when you're telling people which fields are going to need to integrate, and when you're thinking about these fields. So I would really kind of stress that as a takeaway. When you're thinking about the systems and thinking about the data, it is very, very much worth the time to do some due diligence ahead of time to make sure you have the right data, not just all data that you have. That gets very, very messy, and it's going to give you a system that you won't be able to use. Connect your data through the student life cycle. So again, as you're thinking about this on campus, think through the systems that are in play and think through how you can pull everything into one system and report and find these trends out of one system that is going to give you that more efficient and streamlined communication approach through the life cycle. Focus on how data can be used, not necessarily what it's telling you, right? So a lot of times I think we see people get caught up in kind of what data says. Well, data says that I have this many students and it's this much amount. But hopefully what we saw throughout this, we tried to loop that data back to how we can use it, not necessarily what it's telling us. So how do we use graduate data to impact strategic enrollment initiatives, during the recruitment process? How do we use this total marketing spend to impact our forecasting and enrollment planning, 2 or 3 semesters out? So I think that's a really important takeaway, is don't just focus on what data is telling you and then panic and try to fix things. Focus on what data is there and how that can be used specifically to solve your problems on campus. So with that, I think that wraps up all the content. Hopefully that has been helpful and given you all a lot of exciting things to take back to campus and exciting things to think about. I would like to open this up to Q&A. I'll also put my email address up here on the screen. If you all would like to shoot me a follow-up questions, or I would very much welcome any just kind of conversations or questions or future discussions around data, what you all are doing, what Helix is doing. I would absolutely welcome those conversations, so please do feel free to reach out at any point. And then I think I'll turn it over to Danielle for questions.
Great, and we do have a couple questions here in the queue. For the sake of time, though, I want to do a couple of housekeeping items for those of you who have a hard stop. Again, we'll be sending out this webinar, a recording of the webinar out after the fact, so be on the lookout for that email. We'll send out a recording as well as a link to the research report that Matt cited at the beginning of the webinar. And again, we want you to continue to engage with this content, and you can do it on social media using #HelixWebinar. Also, just wanted to reiterate that this content is something that we included as part of our Enrollment Growth Playbook. So if you do not have a copy of that yet, you can visit our website, helixeducation.com, and download that playbook for free. And so with that, we do have a couple of questions here. So those of you who have a hard stop, you can go ahead and jump off, but we'll continue to take questions and converse about this now. So there are two questions that I'm really going to, I think, kind of synthesize into one. Those questions are really getting at the sweet spot between effort exerted and when it's worth it. So what's that sweet spot between, you know, taking enough data to make good decisions, but also not doing too much to where it becomes cost prohibitive for your staff and for your institution?
Yep, sure. I'm happy to touch on that. I think that loops back to planning. There are absolutely, and I'm assuming the reason this question was asked is because you probably know the work and effort it takes to integrate across platforms. And so I would highly recommend, before you even start any of that work, any work integrating, any work even, you know, thinking about which data fields could we pull together to, you know, drive ROI or, you know, drive, you know, better graduation rates. Sit down with you know, the leaders of your university, of your institution, and have a strategic conversation and decide what are the most valuable metrics to get out of a connected data story. And then just move forward with laser focus on what you have decided is the top priority to get from this project. And when you have folks from other departments and other parts of campus needing data, saying this must be you know, we must have this, I would absolutely encourage you all to, as best you can, and I know sometimes it's hard, but stay focused on what you've decided before you started this project. And I think that's going to be the best way to drive value, because as soon as you go in, if you go in without doing the planning, you're going to be completely overwhelmed with data. And there's going to be, you know, things from 100 different places on the university's campus that want to have better connected data, and it's going to take a very long time. But if you have 2 or 3 initiatives that you know need to be an end result of this data, as kind of a first go, right? Maybe this has not been done before on campus. Start small, right? Start small, and then as people see the success rate of what you all are doing with this connected data, I guarantee you'll have people banging down your door wanting to get onto this connected platform to see how they can use this new kind of data intelligence that you've gathered. But I think the best way to do that is start small, be very, very focused, and as those requests start coming in, make sure that you can kind of continue to remain focused and ideally have support of somebody at the university that can kind of help you push back and say, listen, we're focusing on this first. And you know, we're not gonna be building out you know, it might not be the end goal, right? Walk before you can run. So we might want to run in 6 months, but you know, in the first month we're going to crawl, and that's going to help you remain focused and ensure that the work that you're doing doesn't just balloon into an unmanageable project that eventually gets kind of sidelined and then kind of gets people down on big data, right? When these types of projects get sidelined like that. So, yep, I think that would be my recommendation. Start small, stay focused.
Great, and we've got one more question here that I like concluding with, because this kind of speaks to kind of a larger question about the role of higher ed today. And the question is, for 21st century students, you know, that are constantly surrounded by change, is it possible that we in higher ed can act as tailors to find the suitable package for students who are facing these changes and facing these challenges societally?
I think that is a fantastic question, and I think the answer is I think yes. I think as higher ed institutions, I think we just naturally are collecting a lot of data that we've talked about on these students, and I think we absolutely can use that data to help guide them towards a right fit, right? We talked a little bit about that previously. I think as change is happening all around, and as you know, new career opportunities are spinning up, and as you know, they're being pulled in all sorts of different directions throughout the admissions process. I think we absolutely can do that, and I really like that question, and something that I try to do as a product person as often as possible is I try to remember what it was like as a prospective student. You know, whether you're servicing the 4-year undergrad right out of high school, or whether you're servicing, you know, adult learners, and if you can just think what it was like to go through this process, the nerves, all the different, you know, directions you're being pulled, and programs that you're considering, and universities that are emailing you. Think about how we can make this process for them as kind of streamlined and as easy as possible, while at the same time kind of guiding them down a path for their future educational experience. And I think that's something that we as kind of the higher ed sector can absolutely do for these students, and we can kind of help tailor that kind of that journey for them as they go. Absolutely.
Great. Well, this has been Driving Institutional Success with Technology and Data Intelligence. I would just like to thank all attendees for tuning in today. And Matt, especially thank you to you for presenting the content and really helping us all wrestle with some really important questions. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
All right, and that concludes our webinar.